Hi Jay. I know we've done this before and you probably like travel all around the world. So like you probably already well known, already have a
No, no,
lot
no,
of
no.
fans, but like I love all those stuff you post on your Instagram. So for those who didn't know you, for those who are interested in what we're doing, like can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah, for sure, Eric. Hi, my name is Jair Lee. You can call me Jay, and I'm a performance specialist for Exos and also the lead educator for Exos. I've been with Exos for 12 years, which sounds like a lot, a long time, but also is it has gone really fast. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona, at the headquarters, and right now I'm just prepping for a super busy traveling season for teaching education courses for other coaches, physical therapists, personal trainers, fitness enthusiasts around the world. And while I get ready, I'll get to coach a little bit here in the facility, so I don't forget how to do that. So that's pretty much summary, quick summary.
So does lead educator means that you handle like most of the mentorship at Exos, or like you also do education for like your like coaches at Exos?
That's a great question. It's more about the first one, which is the primary educator for Exos external education. I'm the number one. So last year I will say that I did 80%, probably around 80% of most of the education that happened in the year. Um, and this year, actually, it's interesting you mentioned internal education. This year, part of my responsibilities is going to include doing some internal education for our own staff as well. That might involve even traveling to other facilities that we have and help um, uh, share knowledge with our practitioners there who might be very experienced, very knowledgeable, but we want to make sure that we all speak in the same language, which is very important for us at Axos.
Cool. So, uh, I think I went to Exos like 4 or 5 years ago. I can't really
Yeah, I don't
remember the
remember.
date, but like, I personally am fascinated by the framework of Exos. Can you like talk a little bit about it?
Yes, absolutely. So, um, in the summary, the framework of Exos is based on a lot of different methodologies and ideas, concepts that have been well founded in science. Um, So we've taken a lot from the best in the industry for many, many years and put it together in a systematic way to approach training. And that has made the biggest difference within Exos and perhaps other performance companies, other performance systems or methods. Um, and it's been recognized like how well organized and structured things are, right? We can talk about a training session, right? We have 8 different components within an training session if we want to use them, right? We don't have to use all of them, but it goes beyond that. It goes now deeper into, hey, let's take a look at the recovery aspect from this individual or athlete. Do they have a recovery plan? How's their sleep? How's their nutrition? How's the psychological unload? Because we understand that the training session is a small portion of the day that is going to have a small impact towards their goals. And there are other components that may be outside of the training session, but they're going to be heavily influence the results that we get. So we're going to look into that, into the human framework, if you may. All right. So from the nutrition, the recovery, the potential that this person brings to the table, right? So we're looking at a more of like almost like the today's hot topic or word. It's the biopsychosocial model. So I guess we're looking at it from that perspective now to be able to be more holistic, and not just, hey, let's go ahead and make sure you have the best training session. Yes, that is important. We're still going to do that, but we're going to try to look outside of that as well.
Nice, nice. So, what's interesting is like I think last week my one of my colleague is trying to
Hmm.
prepare himself to an interview for I think it's for a D1 Power 5 school basketball head strength coach
Okay.
position. And they asked him to do a like yearly plan for them.
Uh-huh.
And he kind of struggled with it.
Yeah.
So this guy studied under like big time name, big time school, like big time
Okay.
sports science school. And I'm like, man, this guy don't know how to like period, don't know how to like put pieces together. So like
Uh-huh.
when I look into his program, like 5 days a week, every day is like literally like max output, max output. I'm like, you might need to want it. You might want to change a bit. So I kind of like put some of the element I learned from Exos like few
Okay.
years ago and try to like help him set those up. And at that point, that's really like that experience kind of like shocked me because like I
Hmm.
learned this like 5 years ago, I think, and
Hmm.
Exo's been doing this for like I don't know how many years, but you guys are
More
like
than
smart.
22.
Yeah, so like I mean, with all those like evolving with technology, sports techs, but like these are the basic stuff. And
Correct.
these are the stuff you guys do so well. I'm just fascinated by that.
Yeah, I think to quote our president and founder, Mark Verstegen, one of his famous quotes is simple things done savagely well. And it's something that I've taken to the heart, right? It's yes, you can have the shiny toy, the force plates like we were talking about before we started recording, right? You can have motion capture analysis and whatever you want, right? Uh, and if you don't execute the basics well, you might run into trouble. Might not. But I think the chances of you running into trouble are a lot higher if the basics are not well executed. And you mentioned it like with this friend, just being able to do the basic layout of a yearly program. I don't think you need to even get into the weeds of like sets and reps. Like, I don't even think that's correct. Uh, you can put a reference, right? But I would rather work with individual and see what they're capable from. But at least you have a basic understanding that, hey, this is your GBP, right? This is your hypertrophy, and oh, this is gonna be our in season and whatever it is. But those are still the basics, and the understanding of those, they're definitely critical.
Yeah, I love this. I love this. So,
Yeah.
uh, for 12 years at Exos, personally, like,
Yeah.
do you think like what? Because like people come and goes, coaches comes and go. Like, what makes you stay at Exos? And with all those years, like personally, uh, what do you learn the most at the last 12 years?
Yeah, no, that's a two interesting questions, Eric. Um, yes, I've seen a lot of stuff changed. Today at our facility, the headquarters, I think the most veteran coach is about 7 years. So, so a little bit more than half of what I have. Um, the rest have changed positions, moved on maybe to another companies or to start their own things or whatever. Um, so for me, what's made me stay is Exos is a great company to work for. You know, I get all the benefits. I get time off. We have, for the most part, a regular schedule. Mine is a little different because I travel, but if I wasn't traveling, it will be a very comfortable schedule, almost like an 8 to 5 type of job, which in the fitness industry, you know it, you're right now in the university setting, that's almost like a joke, right? To be like, oh, I'm 8 to 5. Like, what do you mean? That's Sunday. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason for me, Eric, has been the culture. The culture at Exos has always been fantastic from day one. It has changed, it has evolved. Um, and but the culture, the DNA of the culture is still there, which is we want to improve, we want to get better, we want to learn from our mistakes. We're not going to settle just for like, hey, let's just do the basics and that's it. There's room for improvement. There's room for innovation, and I value that. Also, there's going to be the last thing I will say about why is the opportunities. There are going to be some opportunities. Not everybody gets them, but I've been lucky enough and I've worked hard enough to have an opportunity to do more than just coaching. I eventually became coaching the coaches through education, and who knows what's going to happen in the near future, right? I'm already looking at, okay, what could be the next step, and I know that there could be an opportunity for me within Exos. So that's why. So that's answer number one. Answer number two. What I've learned in the past 12 years. Um, I will say uh, to constantly how can I say, to constantly think and criticize your coaching, your knowledge. There's that constant desire of learning, right? I mentioned that before. That's what I like about Exos. We might not evolve super fast, but we are constantly evolving, which is sometimes that's what you want. You want actually just a slow, constant drip of improvement, and that's what I've learned from myself, which is from very early on, Eric. I remember probably learning this from Nick Winkelman and the other great coaches that I got to collaborate with, which is at the end of my coaching sessions to always self-criticize myself and ask these two things that I want to share with whoever listens to this. As soon as I finish the session, or as soon as I can, I'm going to ask myself, what did I do well, or what went well within the session? Okay, so then step number one is to give myself praise. Right. So I did very well X. I executed very well these movements when I was demonstrating. Right. I was able to communicate very well the intent of the session, um, whatever it is. Right. But I'm gonna praise myself first. And the second question is what I could have done better. Um, and I think that relentless pursuit of improvement, and I'm being careful with my words. I don't want to use perfection because I don't believe it exists, but relentless pursuit of improvement. It's it's an endless chase, right? Because I don't think you'll never finish improving. So that's always been fun, and I experienced that within coaching athletes and also now coaching other coaches in my education sessions. And I still do the same. I still finish a presentation and I'm like, okay, what went well and what I could have done better. Oh man, I could have explained this better. Sometimes I catch myself thinking, oh man, it's interesting. This time I decided to explain the stretch and cycle a different way, but it didn't go that well, right? But in a different occasion, I did this. So that's that constant reflection, that's the name for it. It's something that I've used, learned, and continue applying almost every day.
Nice. Like even after 12 years, that's amazing.
Never stops, man.
Cool, cool. So
Yeah,
I want to like jump into questions
yeah,
that like more into like training.
yeah, yeah.
So it's like
Let's talk about training.
I messaged you before
Uh-huh.
recently when like help basketball player
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
jumpers. I don't know why. I just look into like more their pelvis, their hip position, correlate with their foot position, foot strike. So, like people always talk about like triple extension. So, let's say when doing a acceleration, we focus on pushing, but what happens with the other side of the pelvis? Is it
Okay,
like pulling or like I don't, can you like kind of explain it? What happens there?
okay. So that's an interesting. I'm I don't know if I even know myself, but I'll take a try. Um, so if one leg on the pelvis is pushing, right? Chances are is that that side of the pelvis is probably going into a rotation, right? And a little bit anterior tilt translation, right? Is going to probably anteriorly rotate to allow that femur to also travel backwards and rotate as well. So if I'm not mistaken, that's I think the word that is being used now is like transmutation or something along those lines. I don't know. And so it makes me wonder, right? If this hip is going that way to allow you to express force and apply force, right? Right. So what is happening with the opposite hip? Is the opposite hip doing the same thing, or the opposite hip is actually going the opposite direction, right? Almost like a retroversion rotation, external rotation, because the other leg has to go into flexion, right? So if one leg is going into extension, the other leg is going into flexion, right? As you're accelerating. So those are almost like counter movement actions. Obviously, I don't think it's like massive. Obviously, the hip doesn't rotate that much. I don't think so. But I think it has to happen that like almost like counterclock type of rhythm, right? As it not only flex and extends, but also rotates and it shifts, right? Into like an internal rotation, external rotation. And it's opposite of what is happening on one side. So that's what I'm thinking about the hip. The hip is constantly in motion, right? With the legs and with a little bit of with the trunk of what's happening, but mostly like the legs, I think, in driving most of that equation, but the trunk definitely having an influence. So I don't know if that gives you any ideas, but that's what I think.
Cool, cool. So that leads me to the next question. Like when we talk about uh like football player, let's say football or whatever track it is, when we
Yeah.
set up a start, 3-point start, block start, how wide is the distance between two legs? Is it like shoulder width, hip width?
Huh. So he actually this is very interesting. I I don't think it matters that much with non-track and field athletes, right? Like how much I mean, let me regress that. Yes, it does matter, obviously, but do you have to be so critical that it has to be like exactly a foot and a half, right? Distance between the front and the back, and the width has to be exactly this. I I'm not sure about that, Eric, because it's just in a natural position that it's not necessarily going to be what happens in the sport now. And I thought about this a lot, right? It's like, so then, step back. What's the point of teaching like a 2-point start position to a basketball player or a soccer player, right? So it's a mean to an end, right? We want to just allow them to experience proper angles of attack. They're going to maximize force application to the ground vertically and horizontally so they can project their center of mass forward, right? And get into a more piston leg action. So when I think about the big picture, it's like, okay, so the goal is to teach him acceleration mechanics, right? But there's always the caveat, which is these are not track and field athletes. We're not looking for perfection or to really optimize that 2-point start position. We just want to utilize it so they can learn how to project their body forward. And because of that reason, I think we need to experiment with a lot of different starting positions. Um, this past weekend, we had Fred Duncan at our facility doing some education on their own, not with Exos, and he was teaching the participants how to do the physio ball, right? When you're sitting down and you lean into it and you start, right? Um, it's cool. It's a cool drill. I think I like it. I haven't used it much. But just watching the participants do it, it's like, yeah, that's a different way to put someone in a 2-point start position to facilitate the angles, to facilitate that lean so they can project their body forward. Does it have to be this way their feet or this way? Ah, I think when we start getting into the weeds like that, we drive ourselves crazy for no reason. I think you got to step back and look at the big picture and say, they're meeting the most important components of acceleration, right? I think number one is, Eric, they're being fast. And by fast, it doesn't mean that they are necessarily mechanically effective. They could be mechanically bad or disorganized and still be freaking fast. But I think number one is always like, well, this person is really fast. I was watching baseball athletes for 3 weeks just sprint, and I'm like, some of them, I was like, oh, that's not that nice looking, but bam, he's fast. So like, well, is he trying to break a world record, or is he trying to be fast on the field? Right. So you got to understand that. I think the number two thing is this person able to project their center of mass, right? By creating a a good angle. And I'm not saying even proper, just a good enough angle, right? So they're not like this, they're not like this, they're not falling. They're able to project forward as horizontal as possible. Then for me, and this is something I learned from Exos, we'll look at the leg action, right? So are the legs moving like a piston? And with this, through the years, I've learned from different track and field coaches, and I started applying the three-step rule, right? Is at best, three steps are going to look like a piston, right? Very rectilinear, right? The foot is kind of close to the ground, the knee is punching forward. That's a good extension. Three steps at best, right? I think more realistic for a field athlete is maybe two. After that, things are going to start cycling more and more and more. So can they get that first and second and maybe third steps aggressively punching the ground back, projecting the body forward? And the last piece of the puzzle for me, and that I've been coaching more and more, are the arms, right? Often forgotten, right? It's like, oh, let's make sure you get the angles, make sure you attack the ground and the leg and the foot angle and everything. And then the arms are all over the freaking place. They're either super tight and barely moving, right? Or they're crossing the body too much. So I started actually paying a lot of attention to what happens to the arms first. And sometimes coaching the arms first before posture, obviously, but the posture and the arms, then the legs. And it's amazing. Not it doesn't work every time, but very often I find myself ensuring the posture is good enough. And then I go through the arms and say, hey, aggressive arms, separate the arms, throw like I Nick Winkleman will say, throw your watch behind you, like hammer down, and you let that happen, and the legs start looking better by themselves. Yeah,
That
magic.
that's like because that is like so interesting because like that's kind of like what happened recently to me is like
Oh yeah.
I I think it's like 2 years ago I started training track and field. It kind of help with some of the track kids in Taiwan, and now I like help some of the jumpers in Louisville. And when they do acceleration, it just like besides the leg action, I started looking how their arm moves.
Yeah.
And if you look at how their arm moves, how their shoulder moves, it's kind of like counter react with the hip.
Yes.
So if sometimes you want to fix something with like leg action, you can't fix it, fix your arm, it just automatically
Right.
fix it.
Yeah, I like that, Eric. And I've learned that from the one, the only Dan Path. Right? Dan Path in some of the presentations on Altus, he will say, you look at what happens in the arms and you're going to get a reflection of what's happening in the legs and vice versa. So I took that many years ago and started playing with that, and it's been fun. But obviously it's not 100%, right? But more often than not, I will say, I'm like, yep, fix your arms and the rest is going to start falling into place. So that's cool that you're doing that as well.
Yeah, nice, nice. So, um, I want to talk about like the other thing. It's also correlated with the hip, and it
Yeah.
also like kind of is a thing that we kind of like message back and through before. So we
Okay.
talk about the pelvis movement in like linear like speed. I want to talk about how they when like let's say change of direction. If I want to shuffle
Mm.
to the right. So also is the hip gonna be a push pull, same as like leaner position?
I will imagine, and again, I'm not gonna say that I'm an expert in this. I'm sure there's all the people out there that are actually way smarter than me, and they understand everything about how the hip moves. So I'm just gonna say it out there. But for me, if I think about it, I don't think there should be that much of a difference. Besides that, in a lateral movement, right? I think there's going to be a little bit more, perhaps like external rotation, right? Internal, external rotation, depending from which side you're looking at it, just because of that type of separation needs to happen, right? To be able to move, but it's still flexion extension. At the end of the day, still flexion extension is just happening on the frontal plane. So yes, that probably changed a little bit. Um, but I wouldn't think it's so much now the pelvis. I think it's the rest is going to be coming from the hip, right? Um, I would say it's probably more similar than different than linear acceleration. That's what I would go for.
Nice, nice, nice. So, uh, go back to like what we were discussing about like you train 3 weeks of baseball and it's a multi-directional sport. It's a rotational sport. So,
Mhm.
uh, I know like Exos they love to like I don't know about other company, but like at Exos they love to implement uh rotation into like no matter it's basketball or football. Can you explain it? Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eric. Um, I think to to be able to provide some context, um, we believe that all human movement is rotational in nature. I mean, walking is rotational in nature, sprinting is rotational in nature. You might be going in a straight line straight ahead, but we just talked about it, right? There's still that rotation just of the hip. Well, you can look that at the leg, right? Rotation, look at the foot, the pronation, the supination that needs to happen in order just to be able to walk. And then you can expand that into a sport that requires throwing or like in soccer, kicking. But let's stick to this one, baseball. So throwing, the rotation is even more exaggerated, I guess, than what sprinting will look like. So we start with that idea, right? So all movement is rotational, has some rotational component. At some moments are going to be anti-rotational, right? We're going to limit the amount of rotation. I wouldn't like even say limit. We're going to control the amount of rotation. Maybe it could be uh, deceleration. And on the other hand, we're gonna reduce force, right? We're gonna accelerate, but while we're rotating. So you have like that anti-rotation and the propulsive. That's how we break down the two categories of rotational qualities and strength and power that we want to develop. So that perhaps gives us an idea, right, of kind of what we're looking at, how we look at the movement and the two qualities that we think are very critical to develop: anti-rotation, control, and capacity to produce force, right? And we can include deceleration there. Um, so with that in mind, then we transfer into a sport that is gonna involve rotation a lot. Like let's say baseball, whether you're swinging the bat or you're throwing the ball, that's rotational in nature, and it requires the entire kinetic chain, right, from the feet to the fingers to be able to coordinate actions, right, uh, to be able to produce that movement. So if that's something that is important, if we think it's important because it's part of the movements that you execute in your sport. So we want to not necessarily train pitching, that's outside of our scope, but we want to train some of the underlying qualities that make up pitching. So that could be internal, external rotation of the hip, right? That could be thoracic rotation and extension and flexion. That could be internal, external rotation of the shoulder, right? Can you do it all together? So we're gonna include anti-rotational exercises as part of the program. So examples will be stability chops, stability lifts, different type of pallet presses, different type of kettlebell halos with different positions. It could be using so maybe perhaps we're looking at mobility. We're doing maybe some isometrics by holding certain positions with the dowel. So that could be, we can say, is maybe anti-rotational plus a little bit of mobility. And then we're gonna add the propulsive exercises, so the force production rotational exercises, such as Kaiser equipment, as you might remember from mentorship. So you might do some rotational movements with a Kaiser in different planes of motion, maybe in different angles. Maybe it's not only horizontal. Sometimes maybe we go from top to bottom. Sometimes we go from the bottom to the top. And the med ball, right? The med ball is going to be another great tool to do so. It was really cool to work with the baseball players this preseason because I got to see different applications of the medicine ball for them, right? Um, um, and it's interesting. It's really cool to watch him struggle with the non-dominant side, right? The dominant side is powerful, explosive. We have the radar. We tracking the speed of the med ball, and then you go on the other side, and it's almost they look like they're not athletes, but it makes sense, right? They're one-sided dominant. Um, and even within some of the plyometrics, sometimes we introduce rotational plyometrics because we understand that their movements involve rotation. So that starts with the force application into the ground and the deceleration component as well. So that's the big picture of why we believe that rotation is a critical component in training. And to close this part, it will be this is that yes, squatting with a barbell, bilateral squat, has an anti-rotational component, no question, right? Doing a reef elevated split squat with just one kettlebell, right, on the opposite side of the leg, so contralateral, yes, of course, has an anti-rotational component, right? So every movement that we do, we can say it has an anti-rotational component. So yes, you already checked that box. But I think if we only stay with that, especially in a preseason type of training, we're missing other qualities and areas of different buckets. And as we like to probably now you're familiar right here in the buckets, right? That we can actually fulfill. Um, so yeah,
Nice, nice. I like it. So I want to end it with this, like you
yeah.
mentioned, even bilateral squat when we do like eat when it's eccentric face, triple flexion, your ankle goes to like E version, your knee goes internal rotation, your hip go internal rotation, and when you go triple flexion, your ankle go like, is it called supination? My English.
Exactly. It will be supination, right? Pierce
Yeah,
supination,
yeah,
supination. Yeah, it goes
inversion,
into hallucination,
rotation.
external rotation of the hip,
Yeah, yeah. So
extension of the hip. Yeah.
even in squatting, that's like not just sagittal plane.
Right, exactly. It is. It is. You're right, Eric. And I think that's something that at the beginning you probably we don't think about it. I remember when I started, I was like, wait, what do you mean there's rotation in squat? Because it's a little tricky to see, right? But I think nowadays we understand it better and we know there's rotation. Without rotation, you wouldn't be able to squat, bilateral squat, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think it's critical to have those qualities, right? So perhaps in a squat, if your foot pronates and supinates, perhaps it's not as limiting as maybe a change of direction per se, right? That is more multi-directional in nature. There's no question. So that's why maybe you can get away with those movements a lot of it easier, right? Because it don't require as many degrees of freedom as, let's say, a rotational chop or a medicine ball throw, right? Where that pronation and supination is more critical to be able to attain the shapes and patterns that you need to create. Um, yeah, it's always present. Rotation is always there. I mean, when I teach, I often mention how critical it is to be able to have external rotation of your shoulder, right? To be able to hold the barbell behind your back. Without that external rotation, like if you don't get here, you're not holding the back squat in the proper position. I don't care if it's high or low position. It's you're not there. And we go into a front rack position, even more critical to be able to have rotation. So yeah, it's always there, my friend. So that's why we like to train it.
Cool. So, I know some of the coaches gonna say it's called fascia sling. Some of the coaches gonna say it's kinetic chain, whatever it is. Like you have like if it's fascia sling, you have like deep longitudinal fascia sling, you have lateral sling, you have like like whatever, like a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
so. Um, Do you think like we can separate like chain like only maybe lateral sling? Eh, Do you think we can only chain like I don't know, deep longitudinal sling?
Oh, I mean, can we only do that? I don't. I don't know. I guess maybe probably you can. I don't really know about that one. I'll have to think about that one a little more. But I think, and I could be wrong on this, but and I'm okay if I'm wrong and somebody call me out and correct me, no problem. I think those are two different things, right? Talking about slings and talking about kinetic linking, those are two complete different, not complete, they're related, but they're slightly different terms, right? So kinetic linking is about the ability to transfer energy from one segment to the next. So it could be from proximal to distal or from distal to proximal, right? How you do it, if you use the slings or don't use the slings, I don't think it matters. You're using everything you got, right? I don't think you can select in that case, right? And it's like you're landing from the ground, right? You're coming down from a jump. You need to be able to apply force into the ground, and that force eventually travels from your fingers to your ankle, to your ankle, to your knees, knees to the hip, hip, and that's that kinetic linking, right? So anyway, so that's one part. Talking about the fascias and the slings, I think is fascinating. Um, and I think there's just thinking about the function and the distribution and the anatomy. I think it will be possible to not necessarily isolate, but focus more on one sling. So let's say if I were to do, let's go back to the pictures. If I were to do a position where I'm holding a dowel, right? I have a dowel in my hand and I put that dowel, it's a long dowel, and I have it against the corner on the ground. And I'm in this position. It's really hard to see me, but I'm in a position where I'm pressing against that dowel, right? And it's going across my body. I think is most likely focusing on that D2 sling, right? From let's say right hand towards my left foot. So you can maybe focus, put more emphasis on one side, right? That activation, isometric or quasi-isometric position is focusing on one sling more than the rest, right? I think if you're doing um, let's say a medicine ball throw overhead, right? You grab the med ball and you launch it over your head rotationally. Well, in this case, yes, both slings have to now work. The anterior sling is working in a concentric fashion, but the posterior sling that goes across the other way is actually working in an eccentric fashion, right? To help you decelerate the motion. So maybe in that very dynamic movements, it's, I will say, nearly impossible to just focus on one, but maybe in an isometrics, quasi-isometric positions, you can maybe put more emphasis only on one sling more than the other. And I think everything probably has a place and a time, right? Where you might want to focus on that. Like maybe if there's an injury, this is the position that you need to focus on. You need to get a little stronger here before you let your body lengthen dynamically before shortens dynamically in that D2 pattern. So I don't know, that's my thought. And I could be
Man, you're
wrong.
smart. You're smart.
No, not at all, man. Just just what I pick up from all the podcasts that I listen to.
Cool. So, besides like rotation, besides like fascia string or kinetic chain, the other thing I want to ask about, and we
Yeah.
kind of like talk about it before, is about like deceleration. So,
Okay.
in order to have like good change of direction, you need to have good deceleration. And like oftentimes in team sport like basketball, baseball, American football, you need to have like good change of direction, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So uh like at I know at Exos you guys like put into acceleration day, max velocity day, crossover and shuffle. I don't know that is that changed or not, but like
It's multi-directional days.
yeah, so how do you put into like deceleration into your training?
That's great, Eric. Actually, it's a topic that this year has sparked my interest a lot, and then started listening to podcasts and reading some research about it because I think it's fascinating. There's a lot more now that we know about deceleration. How many steps does it take? How much force? How much more force are you put into the ground, right? In a given distance, if you're gonna decelerate, how many meters or yards is gonna take you to actually come to a full stop? If you're going near your max speed or velocity, anyways. But long story short, uh, deceleration has to happen. Right? It's almost like it's either you do it slow or you do it fast. But there's no like, oh, I'm not gonna do it, right? Even sprinters have to decelerate. They just might do it over a long distance, right? Compared to, let's say, when you work with a soccer player, you might ask them to come to a hard stop, sprint for 5, you know, decelerate for another 5 or whatever it is, which actually the deceleration will be longer than that. But anyways, I think to answer your question, the way that we introduce it at Exos, for the most part, is going to be in our multi-directional days. That's where we're going to put a lot more emphasis because if we're going to change the direction involves deceleration, no question asked, right? It has to happen. Like again, you could do it slow, you could do it medium, you could do it fast, but you have to do it. So that will be a day that you can put more emphasis on that deceleration component, right? I think there's a lot of room for improvement within what I've seen that we've been doing lately. Obviously, I can't speak for all the facilities that we have and all the practitioners, but in general, I will say I think we can probably do a better job in quantifying and analyzing and teaching the deceleration. It's always there. It's always present. We put emphasis on it. Do we need to put more emphasis on it? That's the next question. Somebody actually asked me on Instagram not long ago. I was like, oh, how much emphasis do I need to put on deceleration? And I'm like, well, it all depends, right? The classic answer, right? Is the person practicing their sport? Well, they're already doing quite a bit of decelerations. Do you notice that within the sport or within agility training, their ability to compress, right, to get into that triple flexion deceleration not effective? Well, maybe you might want to improve those patterns and make sure that they have the qualities to do so, right? Do they have the ankle mobility to do it? Do they have the ankle stiffness to be able to put that heel hard on the ground? Which is fascinating when you think about it, right? That deceleration, let's say linear deceleration, you just sprint ahead for 10 meters and then you want to come to a stop, a sudden stop. It's actually heel to toe type of scenario. So that ability to get into a hard angle, right, and decelerate not just the whole body, but just by starting with the foot, right, it's critical. So do you have the tissue tolerance to do so? So bottom line, yes, we do it. We do it primarily on multi-directional days. Sometimes it might happen on the acceleration days. But I think the best option, at least in general, will be on the multi-directional days. And it's a continuum, it's a progression. Right? I don't think we're only going to do a decel day, right? Per se, it's going to be like, hey, today the focus is on deceleration, so we're going to accelerate for 5, and then I want you to come to a line, turn 90 degrees, right? Stop completely, right? And then we progress it into, right, go to the line at about 60%, and then we want you to snap out of it, right? Touch the line, go out, get out of it at 60%, and then we increase the speed. As we increase the approach speed, the deceleration speed actually increases a lot. And depending on the distance, actually, it gets to a point that in let's say in something like that in 10 meters, you actually gonna spend more time decelerating than actually accelerating, which is one of those things that I learned this between last year and this year. And I was like, oh man, this is interesting. So all those years when I was asking someone to sprint for 5 and then come to a stop, 5 meters or 5 yards, they were barely accelerating. Right? Because if you accelerate too much, you're not coming to a stop right there in 5. It's almost impossible. So you can only maybe within 5 meters, 5 meters, you might be only accelerated for a meter and a half, maybe 2. The other 3 are spent trying to break down. So something interesting to think about. If someone that I'll recommend to read, I can't think of the other person that I was listening to, another researcher. I'll find the name and I'll send to you, who's also done a lot of research in the UK as far as deceleration, but the one person that I know from Australia is Sophia Nymphis, who has done a lot of research on deceleration and change of direction. So whoever is listening to this or will listen to this, I highly recommend that you check her work. She's brilliant.
Nice, nice. So, uh, you mentioned that it was multi-directional day. So, do you guys still teach like movement patterns like crossover and shuffle, or it kind of like changed, kind of evolved?
That's great. No, we still do. We still put an emphasis on some like shuffling days, uh, crossover days, open step, drop step, and sometimes we combine patterns. Personally, I like to combine some of the patterns depending on with who. But I think at the beginning the isolation is fine. Eventually, those patterns we know they don't happen in isolation. Let's say a crossover and an open step, I think is very contextually defined, right? Some instances you're gonna cross over to accelerate. Some instances, maybe in a very similar scenario, you're gonna open step and accelerate, right? Or open step to crossover. So to try to make athletes execute just one, right, and master it, I'm sure it has a place in a time. But when I look at sports, when I'm watching sport, like I doubt that anybody thinks, oh, let me do a crossover. Let me do an open step here instead. No, it just happens. Uh, so I think it's good at the beginning. You can break things down, but eventually you need to let the athlete move, be quick, be explosive, be aggressive, right? Try to refine a little bit of their actions, but let them almost automatically select which pattern is the most appropriate for the situation because that's how it happens in sport.
Cool, cool. So, I think this is going to be the last part of this podcast. So,
No problem.
mhm. uh, it's been I don't know it's how long I've been coaching, but like uh what like interests me or like what fascinates me is like
Yeah. What is
now
it?
even when I'm like in the state working at a D1 Power 5 school with
Right.
all those sport technology, we still hire like Coach Boo Boo Schexnayder, still talk to like Joseph Coyne, these kind of like uh not gonna say they're old, but like they're like probably like another generation, like older generation. So, what fascinates me is like at when they're coaching, they don't have like these kind of technology. They just purely look at how people move.
Right.
And like when we discuss about like training, we don't talk about numbers. We talk about how what position they're in, like their foot position, like their pelvis, how they move. And recently, like I feel like after read all like these papers, I feel like if
Uh-huh.
you try to like just watch how people move, you actually, I'm not gonna say you don't need that, but you're gonna understand most of the stuff. All right, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. I think yes, there's probably a lot that we miss that the eye cannot catch, and that's where technology can make up that maybe significant difference. But for how many years, coaches have been coaching athletes and helping them achieve the greatest accolades without the use of, biomechanics or uh, biomechanical analysis movement with cameras and whatnot. Is it going to change? I think it will. I think we're on that verge of things changing, especially with application of AI. And we all have cameras in our pockets now, so I can see it in 10 years relying more on the computer what it's telling us to make more better informed decisions. But for now, and I hope even in the future, we still encourage to develop that coaching eye. Um, because sometimes I think is what separates a good coach to between a good coach, a great coach, and an incredible coach, right? It's those years looking and trying to understand and analyzing and looking at video too, of course. But it's pretty cool to see some veteran coaches and watch someone sprint and they're like, ah, did you see like how their hip didn't? You're like, what? What are you talking about? How did you see that? Right? It's very neat. That's a skill, right? That's a skill, and that coach maybe has an advantage because he's able to give that athlete a cue that maybe not makes the proper change. Where perhaps I need to go and look at the video and let the computer analyze it and try to understand what the computer's saying. And so for now, I think yes, we need to understand movement, my friend.
Yeah, love it, love it. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry I put you in the hard position to answer all those like super hard questions because those questions are some like I asked a like bunch of coaches and like maybe some of the coaches don't understand what I'm asking. Some of the coaches their answer just doesn't make sense to me. But like I feel like the answer you give me, I really love those. And that kind of like I think it's like 2 months ago I messaged you and asked randomly
Yeah,
just
yeah,
answered these questions. That kind
yeah.
of helped me like all those stuff just makes sense to me and I kind of like built from there. Thank you.
Cool. Hey, I hope it helps, and also it sends me on a quest as well, Eric. This is why these conversations are valuable, and I appreciate you spending the time. It's super cool to see you continue interviewing more people and growing your podcast, and seeing you here at a D1 school. That's pretty cool. Don't stop, and yeah, you learn maybe, or maybe it gives you an idea. It makes you think, and also it makes me think. Right? It makes me think, oh shoot, I need to go actually try to learn more about, like the question about the hips, right? I know it's not an easy concept. I'm like, oh, maybe I should go and dig a little bit deeper and see if I can figure it out or at least understand it a little bit better. I don't think I'll figure it out, but at least try to understand it better. We're just all students and it never ends.
Yeah, man. So for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, and for
Yeah.
those who are interested in your movement snack, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I haven't been doing movement snacks that many anymore. I kind of run out of ideas because with the movement snacks that I was doing, the idea was to not use implements. And I mean, I don't want to turn into acrobatics, and I'm not a gymnast. So, um, anyways, but my Instagram handle, that's where I'm the most active, is coach underscore Jair, Jair. So coach underscore Jair. That's where I'm most active on social media. And if you guys want to, whoever wants to catch us, one of the mentorships, we're going to be teaching the mentorships all over the world in this 2024. So you can go to Team Exos / education. So you can actually learn more about Exos education. Or you can go to the Exos education account on Instagram as well.
Nice, nice.